Hello, everyone. It's Rabbi Ari Sachs of Congregation Beth Mordechai coming to you with another edition of this week's online Parashat class, our online Torah portion class. And on a bright, sunny Friday and towards the end of October, we're going to be looking at Parashat Lekha, and particularly the last triennial section of the Torah portion. And in particular, we're going to be looking at one verse that I think talks a lot about not necessarily just as clearly within the verse, but then as you go deeper into it, that talks about prayer in a very powerful way. And I want to begin first by kind of just getting you to think for a moment about what prayer looks like to you, or what does prayer sound like or even feel like to you. Now, depending upon your own background, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, that no matter where it is that you come from, that there are a variety of different ways of understanding the purpose of prayer. Typically, there are three different kinds of prayer. One is of a petition, one is of thanksgiving, one is of praise. And the different roles that prayer has to play within the context of our lives symbolize those three different elements. So on one hand, you want to simply praise God for all the great things that happen, simply want to give thanksgiving for all the great things that have occurred to us. And I think that the one element of prayer which exists throughout our cultures, and I think is the most evocative and the most provocative as well, is that a petition in which we ask God for something, in which we bring ourselves to a point whereby we need God's help to get us over the hump. That kind of element of petitionary prayer is one that is rife with different issues, meaning if I offer a petition to God and God does not answer me, does that mean that God didn't hear me? Does that mean that my prayer was worthless? And there are no easy answers to that particular question, especially when in thinking about why bad things happen to good people. But at the same time, there is an element of that kind of petitionary prayer that says more important than what God actually answers us, if there is an answer, is the need to pray in that manner. And that's where I want to pick up the story in Parashat Lekha. That at the beginning of this week's, the third triennial, you have Hagar, who is the maidservant to Abram, or eventually to Abraham, and Sarai, or eventually Sarah, who is Sarah, who is Abraham's wife, says, you need to take Hagar as a concubine because I cannot bear you children, and that she should have a child on my behalf, which was a very common thing to do, especially if your wife was barren. And so Abram takes her, and then she becomes pregnant. But at that moment, Sarai becomes, whether you want to call it jealousy, whether she wasn't actually okay with the whole situation from the beginning. But there is a pain for her, at least, in seeing someone else bear a child that she wishes that she could bear. And as it happens, and I think that each one of us has scenarios whereby the pain of one person is then lashed out upon the other, Sarai treats Hagar very badly, meaning that Hagar feels like she has to leave the house. She has to leave Abram's home in order to get away from Sarai. Now, that notion of having to leave the home, first off, if you're a concubine, if you're a maidservant, you don't have any real possessions. You don't have family necessarily that you can go to. You're kind of left on your own. And she's also left pregnant and so going to eventually have to have a child. And so that she now goes out into this world having pretty much nothing. Fascinatingly, when she is out in the world, God appears to her. Now, the text says an angel of God, although we know from other sources that it is possible that when the Torah refers to an angel, it actually does not necessarily mean an angel, but actually means God in a certain kind of a form, or in a smaller version of God's self. Actually, I can show you this very quickly within the context of our portion, because if you take a look at Genesis 16:11, text says, "Vayomer lah malach Adonai," and the angel of the Lord said unto her. But then when we get down to verse 13, it says, "Vatikra Shem Adonai Hadover Eleha," and she called the name of the Lord that spoke unto her. And so what we have here is a very small example, but very poignant example about how the term Malach Adonai, which we refer to as angel, is almost something separate from God, is in fact a part of God, a representation of God that comes and speaks to Hagar. God simply appears and says that I will take care of you, that Ishmael shall have a lot of offspring, and that you shall go and submit yourself to Sarai, that you shall go back home. But at the same time, but that simply just happens, that there's no kind of movement in between, well, how is Hagar feeling after leaving the home before God actually appears. What she's feeling actually seems to appear immediately after God appears to her and says to go back to Sarai, that Hagar actually speaks and speaks to God. And for that, I want to share, I'm going to look at a source sheet put together for this class, which you'll also be able to find on our website at bethmordechai.org. And here, so you have verse 13, which says, "Vatikra Shem Adonai," and so she called to God, Hadover Eleha, who spoke to her. Ata El Roi, you are the God of seeing, or you are the God who has seen me. Ki Amara Hagam Halom Ra'iti Acharai Roi. For thou art a God of seeing, for she said, have I even seen him here? Or seen him, or have I actually seen him with me? Meaning that the aspect, the issue here is that, or what I should say, what Hagar is trying to say here is that you are this God of seeing for the reason that I have been able to see you. Which that, I guess that kind of makes sense. I mean, yes, God appeared, and so then Hagar is saying, because you appeared to me, which the word appearance also comes from the root to see, that because you appeared to me, I've seen you here, therefore you are the God of seeing. All right, that makes sense logically within the context of the verse, but what does that actually mean, that you are the God of seeing? How is there any value in calling God the God who sees? And that's where we pick up a comment from the medieval Italian commentator Sforno. And so he says, I'll read the Hebrew and then you can look over in the English on the left-hand side. Vatikra Shem Adonai, and on this verse that he called the name of God, Vihine Kriyat Shem Adonai, Hi Hatfila Asher Ba Shivcho Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That this calling of God's name is in fact an actual prayer in which there is praise, Shivcho, of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, of the Holy One, blessed be He. B'machshevet hamitzpalel, in the mind or in the thinking of the one who makes the prayer. O bidvarav, or within his particular words of prayer, meaning that first you call out to God as a sign of blessing, as a sign of thanksgiving, either in your mind or in your words. Ke'omram, as a rabbi, Ke'omram Zal, as our sages of blessed memory have said, Le'olam yesader adam shivcho shel makom ve'achar kach yitpalel. That in making prayer, you shall always first praise God, and then afterwards you shall offer your prayer. So interestingly here that just want to pause for a quick second. That here the Sforno is actually saying that in the minds of the rabbis, the term lihitpalel, or to pray, is that kind of petitionary response. Because beforehand, before offering that petition, first you want to start with that moment of praise to say, God, you have done so many great things. You have been able to be, you've created the world, you've created me, you've created everything here. And now because you are the one who created all this, now after I've addressed you in the proper manner, then I'm going to offer the prayer that I really want you to answer. So what Sforno is saying here is that that action of praise is in saying Vatikra Shem Adonai, and she called the name of God. That using the name of God is a form of praise. And then afterwards is that aspect of petitionary prayer. Because in this way, then the one who prays is going to direct themselves to God. And so Amar Imken Sheka Asher Hitzpalela Sidra Sheva Cha'el Yitzbarach Shedavar Eleha Be'amra. So now, if that's the case, that Hagar has offered that prayer, that praise at the beginning, now what is it that she follows? She says, Ata El Roi, you are the God of seeing. And this action of saying that you are the God of seeing is a petitionary prayer. How is it a petitionary prayer? Ata el shel re'iyah bechol makom, lo beveto shel Avraham bilvad. That you should be a God who sees in all places, not simply in the house of Abraham himself. Ke'omram Zal, as our sages of blessed memory said, Kol she'arim nin alu chutz misha'arei ona'ah, because the gates of prayer are all shut except for the gates of wrong or of oppression. So there are a couple of things that I want to unpack from this line here, which I think are really, really interesting. The first is the sense that when Hagar says a phrase, Ata El Roi, you are the God of seeing, that is not simply a description of who God is, like a praise. You know, you are the God of seeing, you're the one who has seen me. What it's actually offering is a petitionary prayer, is a prayer asking for God to be the God of seeing. And what does it mean for God to see? It means that the God of Abraham, the God who came to visit Abraham, all those different three angels that happened in last week's Torah portion, that or actually that I should say happened later on, that the God who appeared there should also appear here with me. And now we have to get a little bit into biblical theology, because we understand as moderns that the idea of God is one of a God who exists in all places. But the biblical understanding of God, especially that of the ancient Near East, is that God exists in very specific places, and that there are ways in which God is described, which indicates that God is only present in that one particular space. For example, you have the God of Jacob, or you should say when Jacob is having his dream later on, he resides in a place that he does not believe that God is actually there, because it is not a place in which, according to the ancient Near Eastern tradition, that there was anything there that showed that there was a God present there, because God's not necessarily present in all places. And then once he realizes that God is there, then he actually creates a monument, a matseva, that he describes as Beit El, or another word to describe it is Betil, which means a monument. that it is actually, sorry, not just a monument, but a monument that is offered as is anointed as a particular representation of God in that particular space. It's like when you think about the idea of idolatry, that you have this figure of a god, and the idea that that figure of a god actually connotes power, actually is powerful and is able to change things just like any other kind of god. That idea of making a monument to represent the Spirit of God actually existing there is, I think, in many ways a forerunner to idolatry. But the sense that we have to do something, that we make a statue, we make a monument, and then the priests come and sacralize it, and they anoint it, they say all these incantations over it, in which that monument then becomes infused with the power of God. And so that is a very specific place in which that God resides. And later on in chapter 31 of Genesis, we actually get a moment in which Jacob has God speak to him, in which God says, I am the God that you anointed as a Beitil, as this monument that you consecrated someplace else. Meaning that what the Torah is actually teaching us through the example of Jacob is that you have a God that is anointed in one specific place, as according to the tradition of ancient Near East, but then that particular God is able to appear in a different place, because at the end of the day, God doesn't just exist in one place alone. God exists in all places. And that's the same thing that's happening here. That Hagar is saying, I know that there is a God existing with Abram because I've seen that those gods appear to him. But I don't know if God is here. And I want God to appear to me. And perhaps her fear, perhaps her cry in leaving Sarai's and leaving Abram's home is not knowing if God's actually going to appear before her. If that when you leave that place in which God is present, you become you come into this place whereby God is lacking, where there is no sense of protection. And so what do you do in that moment? You hope that God can appear, and that's what her prayer is. God, please appear before me. Now, the other aspect, though, that I think that is really important here in regards to that really plaintive cry, saying, God, please appear before me, is the text that Seforno brings as proof text of the fact that God should appear there. And that is, it comes from the Talmud, from Masechet Bava Metzia. And it appears at the end of a very interesting story, a very popular story. I won't go into the whole thing. It's called the Oven of Achnai. It has to deal with different opinions as to whether an oven was kosher or not. And at the end of the day, one of the rabbis, who actually, it seems, knew what God wanted, was excommunicated by the leaders because he wasn't going along with what everyone was saying, and that it was majority rule as opposed to what God said. And it's a very popular story to teach because it actually represents that the law is not residing with God. Lo b'shamayim. The law does not reside with God. It resides with people to decide how we need to best understand the teachings of God here in this world, even if it seems to go against directly what God would have wanted when God made it. That rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer, is excommunicated, and he is then totally distraught, as is all the rabbis, because they knew him. They were friends. They were colleagues. Rabbi Akiva, for instance, was absolutely just downtrodden by all of this. And in fact, one of the greatest ironies here, Rabban Gamliel, who is the head of the Sanhedrin, the one who enacted this ban, Rabbi Eliezer was his brother-in-law. His sister was married to him, and so you could imagine his pain having to excommunicate Eliezer, and the pain of Rabbi Eliezer, and the pain of his wife, in what happened there, and what was going on, and just the fact that now he's lost his sense of community. And so in this moment, in this story, we're actually going to pick it up with Rabban Gamliel's sister, Rabbi Eliezer's wife, Ima Shalom, who is trying to find a way to continue to live on in this scenario whereby her brother has excommunicated her husband from the rabbinate. So we're going to read the story in English, which you can follow along on your screen. Ima Shalom, wife of Rabbi Eliezer, was Rabban Gamliel's sister. From then, she did not allow Rabbi Eliezer to fall on his face in prayer. The idea of falling on your face in prayer is the idea of actually asking God for some kind of petitionary prayer, saying, God, please grant this request of mine. And we're going to find out the reason why she doesn't want him to actually fall on his face in prayer. One day, the new moon became miscalculated for her between a 29 or 30-day month. And the reason why this is important is because on a new moon, on a Rosh Chodesh, one is not allowed to offer any petitionary prayer. Just like on Shabbat, one is not allowed to offer petitionary prayer because it is a joyous day. It is a day of Thanksgiving, and we don't want to be asking for things on a day of Thanksgiving. So she wasn't necessarily worried on Rosh Chodesh that he would offer petitionary prayer because he can't, as a rabbi who follows Jewish law. And so because of that, she felt that she could leave him be for a moment. And so some say a poor man came and stood at the gate and she brought out bread to him. But she miscalculated that it was a day of prayer, she miscalculated that it was Rosh Chodesh or not. And so she actually went to go meet this guy when it actually was not Rosh Chodesh and it was possible for Rabbi Eliezer to offer petitionary prayer. And what happens when she leaves him be? She found Rabbi Eliezer fallen in prayer and said, "Get up, you have killed my brother." That is to say, and this is where the power of this passage really comes in a petitionary response, in a petitionary prayer, in which someone feels either aggrieved, feels pained, feels oppressed, that prayer is so heard that there will be some consequence in this world of that particular prayer. And in the case of Rabbi Eliezer, he was excommunicated for something which God was actually on his side. And so he seems to have a very close relationship with God. And so you could imagine him being so angry, being so distraught, being so pained that whether or not he actually wanted to or not, he prayed deeply to God in that petitionary way. And God responded by killing the man who was responsible for excommunicating him, for killing the man for killing his brother-in-law, for killing his wife's brother, for what is it that he did to him because of how he felt wrong, how he felt oppressed by their decision. And how do we know that this actually took place according to legend, according to what's said in the Gemara, in the Talmud? Meanwhile, a ram's horn blast went out from Rabban Gamliel's house to announce that he died. Rabbi Eliezer asked, "How did you know?" she said. She said, "So I have received a tradition from the house of my father's father. All gates are closed, but the gates of oppression. Kol ha'she'arim ninalim chutz misha'arei ona'ah." That sense of all gates are closed except for the gates of oppression indicates that there's something unique about feeling wronged or feeling pained. That means you're able to call upon God in a place that you would not normally think God would be able to God would be able to appear. In Hagar's case, that is in the sense of appearing out in the wilderness where she doesn't think God actually exists, because that God appears only in the tents of Abram. And here, it's the fact that God is able to kill this man, kill Rabban Gamliel, simply because his servant Rabbi Eliezer was so harmed, was so oppressed, was so wronged. And what does that feeling of being wronged look like? According to Rashi, the great French medieval French commentator, who explained a lot of the Talmud to understand its teachings, he wrote on this verse, "Chutz misharei ona'ah," outside of the gates of wrong or oppression, lefi shetzar halev, since it refers to the pain of the heart, vehi vekarov lehorid demaot, that it is close to causing tears to come down. When you are about to cry, when you are full of such emotion that the tears just stream out, that is the most plaintive kind of prayer that you can even imagine. And it can't be ignored. Think about a child who cries, about a loved one who is just full of tears, and how you can't not respond to it. Even if you don't necessarily feel, and it could be even with strangers, even if you don't feel a connection with someone outside of, even if you don't necessarily feel a connection with someone, but you hear them cry, you feel them cry, you have to find a way to respond. You can't just let it go. And I know that for myself, that some of the most incredible moments of prayer for me, especially during the high holidays, are the ones in which I don't actually say any words. I simply just cry. I simply just let it out. And my hope is that God can simply hear that. Just as when a loved one or even a stranger cries before us, and we feel that we have the need to respond. And so what Hagar teaches us, what Rabbi Eliezer teaches us, is that when we get to that emotional point of needing to cry, that is the most powerful prayer that we could even possibly imagine. It's not about saying certain words. It's not about even offering praise. It's about getting ourselves to that emotional place whereby we just let ourselves out. We just let go to be able to express ourselves as fully and deeply and powerfully as we can. And that according to our biblical tradition and to our rabbinic tradition, when we let ourselves go, when we let the tears flow, no matter where we are, that is when God will truly hear us. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this week's class. Take care. See you next week and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.